When you approach Ma's house, you see this very beautiful facade that represents a barn in most people's eyes. There's a plan to make it into a museum, a gallery space, a general communal art space for people of color, especially the Shinnecock community. And it's really a beautiful space that will support primarily artists of color through different art exhibitions, through artist residencies, and just different programming around bringing different people together and hopefully foster the next generation of artists in this local community. I decided to call the project Ma's House because when I was growing up in this house, my grandmother was always around the house. She had a beloved nickname, Ma, but her birth name was Loretta Silva. When she was towards the end of her life, my mom asked my grandmother, what should we do with the house, this family house on the reservation? And eventually she answered, let's just make it into a museum to honor our family history, along with that of Shinnecock's history.
She thought it would be a good idea because both parents thought it was so always important for all their children to learn about our culture and just be invested in it, you know, who we were, our identity, and just to highlight it at Ma's house. So that's what she meant by making it into a museum.
Just that alone is really inspiring to me to honor her legacy through this gesture of fostering this art communal space. This house represents family, it represents community and opportunity.
When he started, some of the walls looked like, oh gosh, it's all rotten under there.
I was kind of like doing a lot of internet research to see if it's even possible or if it's even worth it. Like, how do you save a house that's been deteriorating for so long?
His eyes would be swollen because he would be working on a floor and he'd be on the basement and the materials would come down into his face. But I just like pray and like, just protect them today, you know, so they're okay. She would be very proud if she could see not letting, you know, the house go down. I feel her presence here. I know that she has made things happen however way that she could because that's the type of mother that she always was.
Ma's house is sometimes known as the Red House. This is the house that I grew up in with my family. Sort of a place for visitors, a place for meals and sharing.
Our grandmother, who everyone called Ma, she lived here and she made this how she liked it.
It just became really known as Ma's house.
Her name's Loretta Silva, Princess Silva Arrow. She was the princess that we loved. Just always remember her being very glamorous, loving, and wanting just to always care for us. We miss her a lot.
So Ma's house was built in the 1960s, and the first people who lived here were Ma, my grandfather, along with their 6 children.
When I got married, my husband came here to live. And then as I had children, Kelly, Jeremy, and then my other sister and her husband, one of my nephews and their children. Like this whole space here, there were so many kids and a family. I can remember there'd be a pull-out couch here, but we were always happy, and this was always cool.
Yep, there were always different aunts, uncles, cousins.
A lot.
During powwow time, that's when they almost got to be over capacity at Ma's house.
Once we completed our newer house down the road and we had to move, and so for the past 5 years, no one has spent time at Ma's house.
It was very sad to see, you know, what a once vibrant place just kind of dying off. One day, Jeremy came up with the idea, what do you think of making Ma's house into a residency?
You want to step more in the frame?
You can come forward a little bit. It's like gonna.
Invite other artists in and just to keep our, culture alive.
My plan for Ma's house is that it's going to have the entire front of the house dedicated to communal arts events and history lessons and workshops.
And the goal is to have a space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to have an art space.
So it'll kind of be like a guest house. It'll also be my home permanently. And it's just going to have a lot of different people, I guess in quotes, living there all year round to pursue their own art projects. And so I want to have work on the walls that can be experimental or don't have to be for sale. What we're planning to do is have work mounted that's 2D on this wall. Just art shows that generate conversation around quality, race, current issues. I've just become so proud of being Shinnecock, and I think if you would just ask someone from Southampton, they might know us for the Shinnecock smoke shops, for the Shinnecock powwow. But one thing I really want to change through Ma's house is to actually transform the public perception of Shinnecock, where we're a modern place, where we have history being celebrated. The reality is on the East End, people who grew up here their whole lives are being pushed out.
We're constantly just trying to hold on to what we have, not let outside forces kind of take over our lives.
The residents of Southampton kept wanting more land. They kept pushing us further and further back. And so Shinnecock today only has around 800 square acres of land. As my grandmother said, we're still here thanks to this little peninsula surrounded by water, because there was just no more land for us to be pushed back to.
Nowadays, we try to say nation instead of reservation, because reservation is such a colonial way of thinking. It's the land of our ancestors. We've always lived here.
So many people that come here for the first time think they're lost, or they don't think that there's going to be any houses down here. Here we are. There was so much generosity around Ma's house when I first started. People were either sharing the crowdfunding campaign, and people would be offering donations from individuals.
We have a check for you.
Oh, wow.
500.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh,
that's so
thank you.
wonderful. Different friends have come down, different relatives have also come and worked.
Roger Waters, who was a Pink Floyd band member, who donated a beehive. Other people have been donating houseplants. Some people have been donating greens that are edible. Just here late at night sometimes, it kind of feels like you're not really alone. Whether that's the creaky floors or just like the draft coming through different cracks in the house. I like to also think that family members who passed on but spent time at Ma's house are still there in some form, kind of approving things that are going on there. Now that I'm taking care of the house itself, I think that the house will take care of me down the line.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. The time-honored tradition of artists around the world communally seeking creative escapes and retreats stretches back far in human history. They're places for creative minds to meet and flourish, to have a change of scenery that encourages them to form connections that are as unpredictable as art itself. They're havens and safe spaces where artists can bond, work, learn, teach, argue, or simply stare into space. a test kitchen for their work and creative breakthroughs. It gives reassurance, healing, and confidence. One such communal art space and artist retreat is the new Indigenous-led Ma's House, based on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Southampton, Long Island, New York. It's the creation of Jeremy Dennis, an artist, fine art photographer, and member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. Originally built in the 1960s, Ma's House was the home of his grandmother and family matriarch, Loretta Silva, also known as Princess Silva Arrow, affectionately as Ma. When asked by Dennis's mother what she wanted to do with the house in the future, Ma expressed a desire to turn it into a museum to hold both the history of their family and of the Shinnecock. During the pandemic, Dennis began to work on transforming the house to honor Ma's legacy and provide a cultural center and safe space for free creativity and healing for primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In Dennis's own words, "My hope for Ma's House is to invite Indigenous artists nationwide to tell their story, share their experiences, just amplify their voice. Because even though we've been here at Shinnecock for more than 10,000 years, somehow the dynamic with our neighbors is that we don't even exist." By inviting artists to come collaboratively, whether that's hosting them for a couple of months or allowing them to use the space to share their art, I think that we can really facilitate a type of collaboration that will help our nation and their nation as well to rise up and be recognized for all that we represent. My co-host on this show is Judy Jorrisch, a longtime community organizer, activist, and founder and creator of the groundbreaking music and health wellness initiative, Breathe the Music Network, designed to address the debilitating symptoms of childhood asthma, as well as cutbacks in in-school music programs. So thank you both very, very much for being here. And thank you, Judy, for co-hosting this. And Jeremy, let me start it off with you with a 2 or 3 part question here. And here it is. Help our audience understand your own personal development as an artist, as a photographer. How is that connected to your tremendous renovation of your grandmother's house there, Ma's house? And as a leader of the nation, Shinnecock Nation, how are you trying to deal with the, that larger political world out there, and which is now so fascinated, and there's an explosion of interest in all things Indigenous. So I know it's a long question there, but get us started. And it's great having you here.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be invited. I'm primarily a art photographer, visual artist, and I've been practicing since about 2013. It's where I really started to establish my portfolio that people know me for today. And it mostly looks at the history of Shinnecock, from our earliest history of what we can see today through archaeology, dating back 10,000 years, all the way up to present time, just telling our present day stories, what we're proud of and triumphant about, and some of our struggles and things that we need to change, and our shared histories. And so as a artist myself, I really love portraiture. I love the social aspect of it, and just meeting new people and letting them know Shinnecock, and creating these new connections out in the world. And so with that, I kind of enhance the social aspect by launching this project known as Ma's House, which is our grandmother's home turned into a communal art space. And as you mentioned before, it was always her desire for, if nothing else, the house to become a space to celebrate Shinnecock history and family history. And so I really wanted it to um, really just be those things and more, if possible.
Mm.
And so, as an artist, in my
Mm.
experience, have gone to different artist residencies. If you're unfamiliar with what those are, usually artists sometimes don't have the means to have huge artist spaces just to create. Sometimes they might not have the focus or the time set aside from their daily lives. They might have like family or job or other things keeping their attention. So sometimes we as artists go to these retreats just to focus on that one project that we've always been thinking about and can finally produce or complete. And so I've been doing that for several years prior to 2020 and the pandemic. And so when the pandemic finally happened, I actually couldn't go anywhere. So my family and I decided to refurbish Ma's house, and the house
Mm.
needed so much work from the framing, the utilities, just replacing everything almost. And so we raised a lot of money through crowdfunding, and that was just another way that people engaged with not only myself as an artist, but the Shinnecock community in supporting us, learning our story. One of the big things that my mom, who's also an artist, Judy Silva always tells people when they visit is that being on indigenous territory or on reservations, you often don't have access to the same funding sources as other people, such as mortgages or loans to build your home. And so Miles House, along with many other on Shinnecock territory, were built room by room by very modest means. You pretty much just have to get lucky in some
Mm.
circumstances to have a house at all. And so when I was growing up, it was three generations in one house, which is pretty common. And so outside of Ma's house, we hope to have this reverberation of um, creating connections even beyond just Southampton and New York State, because we bring in artists of color. They learn about Shinnecock present day issues, history, and from the land itself. And then they go back home after 2 to 4 weeks and share this knowledge and kind of create more awareness and largen the idea of what Shinnecock is beyond this sliver of land that Southampton Town sort of allows us to have today.
Hmm.
You know,
Interesting. Yeah.
your portraiture is really magnificent. I just wanted to say that your photography is quite beautiful, and it's extraordinary that it's finally the portraiture is finally coming from Native American artists. I think what people have who have seen portraits of Native Americans, I think they probably think about Curtis's photographs from um, the 19th century, which was certainly very dignified, but it's very different to have this work coming from uh, people themselves. And it's really quite startling in itself. It's beautiful. And yeah, Jim, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Could you say a little about what your mother's art is? What she did?
Yes, I wanted to ask you.
Well, just as you were describing, usually when it comes to Indigenous or Native American representation, it's usually from an anthropologist saying, like, these are subjects that need to be studied and preserved, or it's Edward Curtis who
Right.
is on this sometimes naive mission to preserve or save this vanishing race from being forgotten
Right.
forever, but
Mhm.
at the same time perpetuating the myth that for some reason like we have to disappear, but there's nothing that can be done except for kind of take what we have remaining. So in relation to my mom's work, she actually went to undergrad for studio art, doing acrylic paint, and she has many stories about being a woman artist and being a native artist and wanting to just paint what she wanted and having different teachers and mentors just saying that because you're not fitting into the stereotype or what's expected of you, you won't see any success in your career. So she ended up making the difficult decision to become a school teacher instead of just following through on being strictly an artist because of the expectations during that time, just one generation before me. And so in the work that she does have from the 80s, it's a lot of kind of reenactment type of work, envisioning what life was once like before colonization or disruption, all the genocide of Native people. So it's usually the landscape, it's us in regalia or our traditional clothing, and different people she envisions during that time.
It's great.
Interesting. So as you're describing your mother's struggles, your own and your grandmother's and your whole family, you're by definition here getting into these larger political struggles of not being defined by the larger culture. And again, let me just reiterate for our audience, you are what, a mile or two or a couple miles from the Shinnecock golf course, is it called, where the U.S. Open is held. This is one of the richest parts of the country, worth billions of dollars, so the segregation is incredible, isn't it? So you're battling so many things at so many levels, dealing with the hurt and traumas of the indigenous experience, and yet trying to resurrect the beauty and the heroism of it as well, the resiliency. And I wonder if you could just, again, briefly give our audience and ourselves here an idea of that history, specifically in the Hamptons. And particularly also, what is the connection with the Plain Sight Project, the discovery now of so many enslaved people in the Hamptons that our friend David Rattray has been uncovering, and Donna and Maria as well. So what is the connection there as well?
Oh, sure. Since we've been here for so long, there's just so many of those older stories that, of course, we're not really proud of as East Enders or people in Suffolk County or New York State to acknowledge, because just like being Indigenous, our ancestors and even our relatives today have faced such hardship that it even makes it hard to just live and prosper and feel like you have a sense of belonging because of that. And so a lot of the work that David and Donna Marie are doing is such an important mission, because it is something that we all can tell about ourselves. We're kind of relearning something that we don't want to hear, but do need to reconcile and maybe correct past wrongs. And so at least here at Shinnecock, we've always been actually known as the good neighbors. And even still, we've had some of our ancestors shipped away for the slave trade, and had different ancestors sort of punished in these unnecessary ways, just because of the land that we were occupying, just because we didn't want to give away all that we had and assimilate. And so I think it's this really difficult history that we need to talk about, and maybe see if there's some sort of recognition or some sort of reparations or land back initiatives that really, until we do that, I think it'll just be kind of a stain on our history, and like everything that we complete and achieve today will be built on that foundation.
I mean, it's probably one of the most contradictory locations. I mean, the association of the world with the Hamptons is of billionaire excess, the quintessential capitalist playground on the planet, and yet and most people are completely unaware of the Native history, the Native presence, and the monument that you've been working on reimagining and reconstructing is a beautiful project. But it's also wondering how the years of suppression of Native culture now beginning to be almost fetishized in a cultural way,
Yeah.
but not integrated into our American history and into American culture. So there was actually a magnificent performance at Lincoln Center last week by Indigenous Enterprise that brought together dancers from all over North America, talking about their history and talking about the history of each dance, the history of the music. And I'm wondering how you see incorporating what you're doing in a way that doesn't
Pull it off.
fetishize it or doesn't exploit it, but
Yeah.
fully integrates Native history into our history, particularly here in New York, where I don't think people really associate the massive Native presence that was here with continuing nations, continuing culture. I think most New Yorkers are completely ignorant of that.
Yeah, it's the central point, the fact that we're pretty much starting from zero when it comes to Native American history knowledge. So
Yeah.
there's like the silver lining is that like you could start from anywhere because of that. Like you could start at acknowledging like the way that we took care of the land and made it possible that everything else is here, the way that we taught the first colonists how to survive on this new
Yes.
terrain and with these new ingredients and materials. So I think that at least on a local level, it's always important to acknowledge the Indigenous or Aboriginal or First Nation people who either were once there or continue to be there, but you just don't realize it. And I think that's just part of our nation's story. It's,
Right.
We
The
don't
invisibility. Yes.
exactly. So we like to highlight certain things in our past, and when it comes to Native people, it's like, oh, you're still stuck on that, even though we have
Right.
these centuries-long celebrations that like, we take off work, we have barbecues, we just talk about in our everyday. But I think it's healthy for us to talk about things that trouble us as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It would be, it would be funny if it wasn't so crazy, but July 7th, right? Part of the Shinnecock Nation, there was a protest by the Long Island Progressive Coalition where you actually went to, was it Cooper's Lane Beach in Southampton, that evidently the town of Southampton does not give you beach permits.
Jesus.
I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, if anything was going to happen, it should be the other way around. You should be, but that's Alice in Wonderland that we're living in. And then there was a march after that, as Judy was pointing out, down Billionaires Lane, where David Koch and Calvin Klein and a bunch of other these characters live. So yeah, the disparity, I'm glad you pointed it out so well. You really took care of the land for these people to then exploit and break treaties with you. And it's just, so again, Ma's house is a place of creativity, of healing, of transformation, and growing political connections and understandings, consciousness raising.
Well, one of the
Tell us some. Yeah, I was going to say. Tell us some of the activities and how you envision its use and what's going on now and what you would like to see happen.
Well, we first sort of began the renovation in June 2020. It wasn't even really an idea before that time. And it wasn't until August 2021 that we opened publicly and had a resident artist come stay with us for 4 weeks. And so since that time, we've had weekly workshops, we've had open studios, just some art-based game nights. Really what we're trying to do is activate every single opportunity to build community. And even though we focus solely on supporting artists of color, all of our public events are open to the public. And so I think it's beautiful example of really what's possible, even though Shinnecock is such a low income
It's
community,
such a low what?
Income.
such a low income community. It's like
Yeah.
how do like the lowest income people in your neighborhood do the most social good? Like as you said, like there's people who live just across the water or 1 mile away, and they could just put a drop in the bucket and make all the difference. And so I think that this is sort of our role all along as Shinnecock and Indigenous people. Just
Can you
like
say more what the economic basis is of what people do, what the economic basis of the community, and the uh,
How do they survive?
what do you call the area? That is, you're a separate nation, so
yeah,
how do you refer to it?
I always proudly say that we're sort of a country within a country, just because
Mhm.
we do have sovereignty, we do have a government to government relationship with the United States, and so we pretty much are our own entity with our own self determination, economic development, ways of just guiding our own future. And so I think with that, it comes with pluses and minuses. Um, I think that we eventually want to get to the point, like before contact, where like we didn't have to rely on other people, and we could just kind of live the way that our ancestors have lived for thousands of years. But as you mentioned earlier, we rely so much on capital and money, and everything's privatized. And so even from our earliest contact period, it became clear that we would no longer have access to like foraging for resources, and we were forced into the job market, and we weren't afforded jobs that could allow us to survive. And so this is still reverberating into today's world. I think on the East End, at least, it's like working service industry or being a real estate agent, which kind of goes against your own
Yeah.
philosophy of like selling the land and things like that, and serving affluent people.
What about an educational system, municipal services? Is that under control of the town of Southampton? Fire, police, um, medical care. How is that? And also, what is the situation, the legal situation in terms of reparations? Aren't there cases that are still being heard for that?
I think when it comes to reparations, it's always sort of a town to town situation, where some um, specific areas or maybe even counties or states might make those decisions. But here in Southampton, we've just had so much struggle just trying to get our Shinnecock Hills back. But finally, after 30 years, we had a sort of a partially anonymous donor, Roger Waters, come forward and purchased the lot that was stolen from us, our most sacred site, the Sugarloaf Hill site. So this was only kind of like a half acre of land, and it took $5 million just to preserve that. And this is
Wow.
part of a over 2,000 square acre landscape that was taken outright from us. We've never been compensated, and it's just something that my mom's generation focused on returning, and now my generation is just like so much stress and anxiety towards getting Southampton to do the right thing on both sides.
And is it true that the burial grounds of your ancestors are on the Shinnecock Golf Course now? The now Shinnecock Golf Course. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, if you're familiar with the South Fork, our burial grounds go from the Shinnecock Canal on the western border east to Flanders, New York. And so that includes SUNY Stony Brook's Southampton campus. It
Wow.
includes the U.S. Golf Links and the Shinnecock Golf Course. And so there's actually documented evidence of some of the owners originally who took some of our ancestral remains and turned them into sand traps, or just totally ignored the presence of human remains just for the enjoyment of this game that very few people get to enjoy.
And are there any pending or active legal cases about that right now?
I think for Southampton, we usually are allowed to bring it up every couple of years. So we try to bring it up and fight it every chance we get. But usually we're told, like, you waited too long, or this return of land would be too disruptive, or
You've waited too long?
What does that mean? I mean,
yeah,
you waited too long.
I don't
You've
know.
been waiting long enough. I mean, yeah.
Exactly.
And can I ask this isn't, I should know this, but is the Shinnecock Nation a part of any of the larger nations in New York, Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga? Are there any, or is it a separate nation itself?
Well, Shinnecock, we received our federal recognition back in 2010, and so we joined over 570 plus other unique federally recognized tribes. But we are a Shinnecock people, part of the Algonquin.
The Algonquin. Okay.
Yeah. So the Oneidas and the Iroquois are from a different.
Right. They're from Mohawk. Yeah. So the I didn't even mention Algonquin. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Good too. Sorry, I should know that, and I'm sorry I didn't. But
We all need to learn these things. But that's part of Ma's house plan, right? To bring members from other indigenous nations together because they've been separate. Now, to develop what more unified, a more unified consciousness, appearance, awareness, just friendship.
Well, not just indigenous artists or people. We bring in artists of any color background. It's really just an opportunity to acknowledge our similarities. And I think when I started Ma's House, it was either artists who just like need a break from the trauma of the everyday, just like the daily discrimination or racism, perhaps where they come from or what they've experienced, and coming to a space of finally belonging in a space of inclusion. And so we support artists in that way. And we're also supportive of artists on the other end of the spectrum who are really pumped and really want to create political or social justice work and feel like there's actually a space in the art world for that. Like, it doesn't have to be commercially viable or auction viable to exist as art.
I'm wondering if you could tell us also about the history of education on the East End of tribal children. What was that history? Were there separated schools the way there were in other parts of the country, or how were Shinnecock children educated over the last 200 years?
Well, in the early to mid 20th century, we actually had several sort of middle and intermediate school houses. So these were for the few Shinnecock youth who were going to this school. And unfortunately, it burned down. The original one burned down first, and then quickly they rebuilt it, and that one also burned down. And so that actually used to be on the foundation of our present day community center. And so I think about that all the time, and just the need for sort of a centralized school that focuses actually on our history and incorporates that into our curriculum. But in recent years, we actually developed a preschool. So Shinnecock youth are able to go for free. They provide the daycare and education. And for those 2 years, you can just kind of have that support as a parent and have that specialized curriculum as a youth. And it's really something I'm always envious of, wishing I had that growing up.
That's great. But then have Shinnecock children gone to public schools in the area, or were they prevented from doing that and had to go to other schools? How did that mirror what happened elsewhere?
Well, from earliest times, we were always encouraged to sort of assimilate into Christian or Western values. And so we were actually never barred really from schools. We were actually brought at times to boarding schools, and these were sort of
That's
forced
what I was asking.
education.
Yeah.
Wow.
But and that happened on Long Island also.
Yeah, some of our Shinnecock ancestors were brought to these institutions.
Horrible schools, horrible institutions. Yeah.
And so when you read of the Pope Francis, uh, grappling with the question of doctrine of discovery, and I guess what
He's apologizing to
he
the
has
Canadian
apologized.
nation. He's
Right.
going to pay penance. His trip is to
Penance, okay.
Yes.
Penance and penance. But again, this is heavy duty stuff. These religious ideas became the foundational building blocks of white supremacy and manifest destiny that we're dealing with today. So these doctrines are so enmeshed in the culture and political structures and psychological awareness of people. It's so hard to break that down. I mean, this is a step certainly in the right direction. To follow what Judy was saying, what about bringing part of the curriculum or the history of the Shinnecock Nation into Southampton high schools, public schools? Has that been tried, or what do you think about that idea?
That's really important. We've actually had some success with the Shinnecock curriculum in elementary school. And so it's usually a segment in social studies that they learn about everything from our earliest history, our customs, to powwow, and our version of Thanksgiving. But
Right.
I think we really need to learn more about Indigenous people, not just when you're sometimes 8 years old and that one time in your entire life that you're
Right,
told that
exactly.
there's like a vague sense of Native people existing. And so that can be the form of new textbooks. It could be social events. It could be sort of inviting Native artists or educators into the classroom. And so I noticed in recent years that has been more of a pattern of kind of teachers doing their own thing and just inviting
Yes.
sometimes myself, or I recommend other Shinnecock people to take these opportunities to just tell their own story. Like that in itself is just so important and means a lot to the young people in the classroom who think that we're so different and think that we're something that exists in the past or not at all. And so I really encourage that whenever possible.
Have you noticed? Have you had pushback in the form of critical race theory? This is people coming out of the woodwork and complaining about this, pushing back. What you're saying, what you're trying to implement.
Yeah, definitely in the South, it feels like it's such a huge threat. But luckily here in New York, we still have that liberty to kind of teach whatever we feel and have nothing kind of come and attack the teachers. And so I think that we're safe for now. But I think when
Yes.
it comes to acknowledging like the more difficult themes, I've only noticed a handful of schools and teachers actually tackling those ideas. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
It's it seems like there are two very important and yet not contradictory, but two different themes that need to be integrated into American history and specifically social studies in that area. That, on the one hand, and the word Holocaust is used to understand that there was a Holocaust against Native tribes. But on the other hand, some of the indigenous dancers last week were saying to me that they go to some places and people say, "Oh, I thought Indians were extinct." I mean, so to not understand the vibrant current culture and nations and living people who are participating in the development of our country. So, Jewish groups have people go into the schools and teach about the Holocaust, but on the other hand, it's not something in the past that's gone. And so Ma's House is a way of really bringing it into the present and developing ongoing cultural exchanges. But has there been dialogue with the school boards, or to have it in a more systematic way built into the curriculum? Not just a special, one-time presentation. Oh, by the way,
Here's Jeremy.
yes. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Well, I totally agree. I think it's something that needs to be worked on, but it's such a huge overhaul of what's being taught, because
Yes.
you do have to admit there's like so much that the teachers have to bake into what goes on in the everyday in the school year. And I think there's just huge discussions around like not only Indigenous education, but just like how are we teaching kids in general. And
Right.
so when I think of Ma's House and the future of education and engagement, I often think of our annual powwow. So we have a powwow that's been going on for more than 70 years here at Shinnecock, and this is a really grand event. We're finally going to have it come back this year after 2 years of cancellations due to COVID.
Uh-huh.
But it's this amazing 4-day weekend during Labor Day where thousands of people come through. Usually they bring their kids, or they come back because they were a kid originally and want to bring their children. And it's a lot of education. It's a lot of meeting Native people. There was a really staggering statistic and study from 2015 that I believe it stated like a quarter of people didn't know Native people still exist.
Exactly. It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if there are people who acknowledge it, like 2/3 of people, according to that study, don't even know a single Native person. So it's this huge disparity, and I think it's
Or don't know that they know.
Oh yeah, that's true too. So that's a whole bigger discussion, but I think it's
Yes.
just sort of the state that we're in today. It's like not just Native issues; it's all about like otherness and trying to separate ourselves at times. And so through Ma's House, I hope to have everyone feel like they can be in this safe space to use art and use conversation and creativity to maybe problem solve around these issues and come and seek solutions to maybe our own biases or our own stereotypes that have entered into our thought process. And so there's a lot of things that we're trying to work on and improve on these modest means.
So is this powwow, is this powwow part of I had a colleague who would always go to the Native powwow, but it was upstate among the larger Mohawk Nation. So is this Algonquin and Mohawk and the New York nations all the way up to Canada together, or do you have a separate one? And what are the relationships to the different? Because I know there are annual powwows across the country. So who's included in the one you're discussing, and what's the relationship to the other ones?
Oh yeah, it's another great question. Actually, usually it's every federally recognized tribe. They have their own unique powwow, and for the most part, they try not to overlap them, so that if you're a vendor or you're a dancer or you just love Native culture, you can keep going each weekend to these different powwows throughout New England. At least that's what I do. Just cross
That's
the ferry
great.
or go up to Queens or down to New Jersey, and you have this cluster of relatives that you usually run into and can support through buying jewelry, buying food, or just getting a ticket and enjoying the dance and education segments. And so that's something that I look forward to as a healing event as well. That's actually where powwow, the word, came from. It's one of our Algonquin or Narragansett words that sort of references someone who's sort of a medicine man or shaman, as we believe it to be today. But we believe in dance, we believe in community as a central part of healing, and just finding that healing in ourselves. And so we try to encourage our youth and those who might be dealing with issues themselves to engage in powwow as an annual way of healing.
Well, I think this year the powwow should extend a little bit toward the golf course and maybe take in part of the Greek Orthodox Church there. I'm Greek on one side though, but anyway, that's a whole other thing.
So where will this powwow take place?
Yeah, within the
Oh,
reservation.
absolutely. Right on the center, like literally on the heart of Shinnecock territory, we have a year-round powwow stage. And so it's the unique one of its kind. It's this huge diameter, kind of 6 feet tall drum. And so they set up these huge speakers on each side, and it feels like you're actually feeling this drum beat as the dancers dance on top.
That's amazing.
And it's such beautiful land too. And I mean, you're so near the water, obviously, the canal there. It's just gorgeous and gorgeous. Now, I did want to ask you too, Jeremy, your work now has been presented at the Hudson River Museum, the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Museum, the Parish Arts Center Museum, the Southampton Arts Center, even the Second Avenue Firehouse Gallery in New York City. So your work now is becoming seen and appreciated beyond Ma's house there. What do you make of this? How are you dealing with that? How are you handling that?
Well, it's really sort of blessing because, as I said before, my mom's just one generation before me, and she found and faced such difficulty fitting into both museums and into commercial spaces. And so it's only, I think, after 2020 that I've started to really get this huge amount of support and feeling like galleries and art spaces are admitting that perhaps their boards don't have Indigenous representation, perhaps the people attending these museums are Indigenous, and the people are showing or collecting in their museum collections aren't of Native descent. And so I believe that not just museums, but museums do have this mission to actually represent everyone in the community, not just the people who the trustees really love or already have in their collection and want to boost the value of. And so it's slowly starting to change through that just mental shift, and also younger people entering into these museums and having that knowledge acquired already.
It's just scratching the surface, right?
We only have about a minute to go. Judy, do you have any final question or so? We have a minute or so.
Well, it's a big question, but
Good.
Find a way to continue the discussion, because your art is much more holistic, and I would love to know some of the relationship of the visual to dance to music. It's a much more holistic approach to art and culture, and we would love if there are other things you'd like to invite us. If you want to tell people how they can come to Ma's house or follow your events, tell us a little bit more.
Oh, sure. If you're on social media, we're available at Ma's House Studio. So that's Instagram and Facebook, but you can also go to our website, mashouse.studio, and join our mailing list. And so we're open by appointment, and we really sort of exist so that people can engage, they can meet Shinnecock people, and also support the work of artists who came before. A lot of their work is for sale, and it benefits both Ma's House and the artists who have come and gone. So it's always wonderful when they get that surprise about your work sold. We're celebrating. Next time we see you, we'll have to go out and get some food, and we'll send you the proceeds, and everyone's always happy when that happens. But we're hoping that during powwow, if you come during Labor Day, you'll go to the powwow, you can come to Ma's house, vice versa, and just have this nice social engagement.
That's great. Yes, that would be.
That really is. That really is, Jeremy. We've run out of time. Much love and respect. Thank you so very, very much for what you're doing and the energy and the spirit that you created and are keeping alive. It's just tremendous. And we'll be seeing you again very, very soon. Judy, thank you very, very much as always.
Well, it was great. I'm so glad to meet and talk with you, Jeremy, and delve into this more. A long conversation to continue.
Let's continue.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you both so very, very much. And thank you all for being here on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.